just hold on. You're okay. You're doing an awesome job. You're doing an amazing job at home. You're doing an amazing job at work. You're fine.
Hey, Neta, welcome to MoneyBites.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We always start off with a one-line intro. How would you introduce yourself?
I think I would introduce myself as someone who is passionate about community, innovation, and people.
We're actually going to start off with your current role at Okta. You're the Director of Innovation. I'd love to start off with, how do you define innovation?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think that's often kind of where these things start, is how do you define innovation? And I love to make that definition as broad as possible. And I think that the reason is, if you foster a sense of innovation, if you create that space, people will surprise you. And I think that the more narrow that you go when defining innovation, you only stand to lose. So I think that if you can think about how you work through the products, how you work through the ideas, like your hackathon project, and make sure that they're able to get feedback quickly and that they're able to fail fast and you're able to learn. So you don't want to kind of like let these branches go forever. You want to prune the tree. But I think in the initial state, in the definition, you want to go as broad as possible. And so, something that we came up with at Okta was this kind of list of like, this can be a feature. This can be an improvement. This can be a net new, big, bold idea. This can be a document. Like, this can be almost anything. It is really about creating the space. It's really about the empowerment and the tooling and the opportunities to get feedback. It's about like, how do you foster this thing and nurture it from start to finish? And by creating that space and not telling you in a very small box what innovation is, you get the most innovative parts of people.
I have to ask, like, as a Director of Innovation, given the title is so intriguing, what does your day in the life look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel very lucky to get to work in this space. I think that I often get to partner with different leaders around different initiatives that they're trying to work through. So there's obviously the angle of hackathons, which I worked on at Meta and which I also lead at Okta. And I think those help foster this culture of innovation. But then it's also like, what are the other things that we're doing? And how do we make sure that we create the space, that if we say that what we want is innovation, how do we make sure that our behaviors match up to that? How do we make sure that things are, again, getting the feedback, failing when they need to fail, so that we don't then say, oh no, we've wasted too much time or energy on this. So a day-to-day for me is often there are a few different events that I'm working on around like, how are we making sure that people know what are our priorities? How do we think about our investments? So how do we think about our messaging to make sure that our messaging to people is folks feel empowered? They feel like they can own and drive things. And then it's, some of it is execution. Like, we have a hackathon coming up in April. So we're looking at what are the company priorities that would align with this? Again, you want to do innovation, but you want it to make sense. You want to make sure that people feel like there is some return on investment, that it aligns with our business interests. So it's working with different leaders around that and kind of making sure that we have the right buy-in, making sure that projects are getting the feedback that we want. So if you build something really amazing, but you're not able to connect it to the right team and the right folks are not aware of it, it doesn't go anywhere. And often there are silos. And so how do we unblock that and kind of help people make sure that we're making those connections? So that's that like community building. So my day is usually some combination of those things.
If somebody wants to introduce innovation to their team or their company, any advice on how they can get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most important thing is to start with the why. So what are you trying to achieve? What would success look like? And I think that there are a lot of really excellent arguments around that. And then also like what happens? What next? Because like, for example, let's take hackathons. I don't think hackathons are the end all be all or the only way to do innovation, but let's just take that one because it's kind of known. It's actually not that hard to run a hackathon.
There's so much logistics.
There are things that you need to do, but you can do that. But that's not actually the critical part. The critical part is what happens afterwards. That is the real work. So what happens to those projects? Like if you would have participated in that hackathon and afterwards nothing happened, No one gave you feedback. You didn't go to present to Cox and the rest of the leadership team. You didn't, an example for Meta is after you presented, I sent an email to every leader and said, here were the projects you really liked. Who do you think those should be connected to? Because that was a real blocker, is projects would get stuck. They didn't know who to go to. We created a panel where people who had successfully hacked and pushed their projects forward, hackers could come and present to them and say, this is where I am. This is what I built. What should I do next? How do I get unblocked? And that can include like, great idea, good job, good innovation, doesn't work. That's okay too. But also, have you considered this? Should you connect to that? So the real work is actually, I think that really innovative and smart people, they don't want to build things just to build it. They want to make sure that somebody is looking at it, that it has, again, it can fail, but somebody should tell you why. And so I think think about like, what does success look like? What am I trying to achieve? Call it a pilot. Say you're testing it out, because you get a lot more freedom if you call it a pilot, right? You're testing it. And then what is going to happen? What are the signals? How am I going to know if I did well? Is it about like the sentiment and people feeling empowered and then taking that into their core work? Is it that I really want to see like 1 to 2 things that might impact the roadmap at some point? Is it, whatever it is, but trying to tie it back to some kind of like success metrics and having a plan for the after.
I love that. For example, just from my personal experience, every few years I do like a designing your life-esque brainstorming of how I want my life to be in the next couple of years. But if I don't do a feedback loop and actually execute on it, it's just daydreams. So I love the fact that you're providing visibility with leadership and more concrete ways to set the next milestones and momentums in place. That's awesome. A follow-up question to that, though, is I don't want to bring politics into this, but in this climate where DEI is getting canceled and where the market is very uncertain, a lot of great programs are at risk. Is innovation also something that you need to fight for with leadership?
I think that sadly we're at a place that is super challenging. I think that you saw for Meta, there was a new product experimentation team that no longer exists. For Google, Area 120, I think is also Area 120 Google. Anyways, I think that they also shut down a lot of their programs, right? And like Waymo and a lot of really amazing innovations started there. I think that often what you see is when companies need to make trade-offs, it's one of the things that they look at cutting. So then you just need to reframe, right? So if we're not in this place of saying we're willing to invest endlessly, we're willing to like really open our wallets and do this, okay, how can I show you like that there is a value to this, that there is a value to your bottom line, that there is a value to people feeling engaged and people doing their work better. So even at Meta, when I joined and it was more of a time where people were willing to invest in it and the political climate was different, I still had to align my messaging to leadership. So what I found initially is that people were very supportive of hackathons, but they looked at hackathons in the same way that they might look at any other extracurricular activity. And so what I needed to do to speak to like the first level managers so that they would prioritize this time is I appreciate this kind of tepid, and this is not across the board, but this like tepid support, but you need to understand that this actually helps people be better at their job. And what we were able to do is add a survey to try to understand. And people said, oh yeah, I use the connections I make outside of the hackathon. They make me better at doing my job. I use the skills I build. They make me better at doing my core work, the thing that you pay me to be here. So these things like, yes, sometimes it'll influence the roadmap. Yes, sometimes it'll bring its own returns, but there's a cost to not doing it. And it's that employee engagement. They will go and innovate and they're going to do it on weekends. They're going to do it on nights. They're going to do it for someone else. And you want to think about how do I use it for me? And in terms of return on investment, how much time am I actually asking of people relative to the rest of the year? It's actually a very small investment. And if it gets them engaged, it gets them excited, it gives them the skills, it gives them the opportunities to experiment, it creates this space and fosters this real deep connection and excitement and a few like amazing things that hopefully influence your roadmap. I think that it becomes a really strong investment for a leader in terms of their broader mix.
My One takeaway from what you just said is creating your own KPI. Sometimes it's not so visible to get leaders, but also like the IC's buy-in on why something like this is so important. I love that. I also want to tie that back in with the beginning of your career journey. Your sort of life KPI has changed several times, and you started off with a role that was completely different in hardware as an engineer. How did you like that experience? You mentioned it was one of the most thought provoking times of your career.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So I studied electrical engineering. I grew up in the Bay Area in Cupertino, where Apple is headquartered. My dad is an engineer. My grandpa's an engineer. My grandma's an engineer. And I grew up sure that engineering was the one thing I was not going to do. Despite being very good at math and like very, very logical, it just seemed like people were born engineers, and I didn't feel like I was born an engineer. So I went to college thinking that I would study anything but engineering. And I tried several different majors.
Wait, you saw your family being engineers, and you didn't. They felt different from you, or
Engineering is like a black box. Like they go to work and they come back, but like, what do they do? I mean, I would tell you even now, like people who work in tech, this thing where like you can't, it's very hard to communicate what you do. Like you're not a doctor, you're not a vet, you're not you don't build things, you're not an architect. Like you're not, like it's very hard to understand what it is you do all day. I used to visit my dad's offices. They were always cool. They had like ping pong tables and soda machines that were free. I think it feels like a secret handshake. It feels like a club. It feels like something that you would know if you were a part of. And it was only at the end of my first year, after doing a lot of different classes, that a friend said, I think you would really like this. And I tried it and I really liked it. So I studied hardware engineering, and despite doing very well in classes and really enjoying it, I still thought it wasn't for me, and I wasn't going to do it. I tried to do Teach for America. And they told me that you had to be studying math. And I said, but I've taken all the math. And because there was a hurdle there, I was like, fine, I'll try it. So I got an internship at Broadcom, and I loved it. It was really fun. I liked the problems I was trying to solve. I was doing like board level design. It was amazing. I was straight out of school, and they just like let me design things. They asked me questions, and then they took my answers seriously. And I was like, why is anyone listening to me? I don't know what I'm saying. But for you, like, I guess I knew enough. And I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it.
And I can see that in your career satisfaction graph. It increases, it plateaus for quite a while, and then it plummets. You mentioned managers and the importance of managers in shaping your career. What happened?
Yeah, I think, again, the interesting thing with tech is that it can often feel like it's not for you. Like when you're in it in the middle and you feel really good, there's nothing like it. You're part of these teams, you're building amazing things, you're imagining things that may not have existed otherwise. And you're kind of like touching the edge of what you're able to understand from a technological perspective, at least for me. But I think that there's the confidence of like, am I doing something important? Is what I'm doing matters? And I think that comes back to that empowerment piece, which is always important to me around innovation. Like it's the safe space that you can fail. You can try it. It doesn't work. You can get the answer wrong, and that's fantastic. And you have that psychological safety. For me, at Broadcom, at a certain point, I had a manager that I think was significantly less supportive. And I think that historically I'd always had great mentors. I'd always had amazing managers. It's a place where people stay for a really long time. I left at this point about 8 or almost 9 years ago. And a lot of the people I worked with, they're still there in the same positions, which is amazing. Like they are amazing. They build really cool things. But at some point I had a manager that I think both like had less trust. I had children, and I was surrounded by men who had spouses who did not work. So I felt like I was the only one who had children. I was the only one who was pumping. I was the only one who would get the calls from childcare. And that combined, I think, with like not feeling secure and not feeling like I had a manager who appreciated me, who called out my wins, who said thank you. I think more questioned things than kind of was supportive. I think that was really a challenging environment for me. And I think that's probably what you see there.
We had a previous guest speaker, Lori Rodriguez, who mentioned for a woman to reach the executive level, most of these women found the secret sauce, which is one of two routes. Either they were the breadwinners and they had husbands who stayed home and took sort of reverse gender roles, or they partnered with their partner to figure out like, what can we delegate? What are the battles that we're just not gonna touch? Sort of looking back at this period, do you think you might have done either or a completely different path, perhaps?
Yeah, I would argue there's one more path on that executive kind of path forward. And one of them is not having children. I think that you often see like very senior, it's not exclusively the path, but I think it's another one of the paths where people feel like they have to make this choice or this trade-off, unfortunately. I think I also was the first out of all my friends to have children. And I had 3 kids in 4 years, which is, it's a lot. And I think part of what I felt was probably overwhelmed. And so when I had friends who were having this moment of like, I think I should leave, or maybe I should do this thing, I said, like, just hold on. Like, you're okay. You're doing an awesome job. You're doing an amazing job at home. You're doing an amazing job at work. You're fine. Like, I think there's this like letting go of certain standards or ways you've done things in the past. There's like a compromise, which I think you mentioned. But part of it is like, it is overwhelming, but it's a moment in time and it will pass. I went back to visit my old office and my manager, and I saw this front end that I had designed and they were still using it. And it was probably a year or 2 years after. And I, in my mind, was doing a bad job, but here they are, this like leading semiconductor company still using a circuit that I designed in a moment when I thought I wasn't doing a good job, but I was. And like, maybe it's a different version of you, and maybe it's not as good as you might have done when you were getting more sleep, or when you were juggling fewer balls, but it is probably still amazing. And everyone has these moments. And I think that I thought that leaving would make it easier. And actually, I really missed it. So I think that for anyone who feels overwhelmed or feels like they're balancing a lot, these things are all true. Like, give yourself a break. Treat yourself with the kindness that you would probably treat someone else. Because I think I tend to be more critical of myself than others. And I think like what I wished I would have had is a mentor, an example. And that was the challenge of working with exclusively people who hadn't had the same lived experience as me, is I didn't have someone I could turn to who could say to me like, it's okay. And it was okay. Like, it would have been fine. So yeah, that's something I've tried really hard to do for others.
That's amazing. And in terms of just being able to just take a step back and objectively look at it, you did mention something that's very evident in your satisfaction graph. After you leave, your career satisfaction, it takes a while for it to gain back to the satisfaction that you were in before. And you mentioned, as you were sort of going through this journey of trying to juggle but also find new opportunities, you found yourself in this odd position of looking for opportunities where you were overqualified?
Yeah, that was pretty terrible. So I think that I ended up in this like amazing space that I love deeply. I ended up in these like really incredible roles that I feel so lucky to have ended up in. But I think that it came from this kind of like lack of opportunity. And like I went back into the market, and I worked at Broadcom for 11 years. I did hardware design, and I ended up doing analog front-end design, which is like a very unique skill set that not that many people have, very technical. And I thought, surely after so many years working on so many boards, leading so many projects, going through so many different roles and positions, and really very positive reviews all the way through, when I'm ready, I will easily be able to find another position. I have a lot of experience in this great field, in this great company. I've done a lot of things. And what I found when I went to interview is these questions like, why would you stay at this one place for so long? or I took about a year, less than a year and a half off. Okay. So 11 years of working full time across very different senior roles, and then a year and a half off. And suddenly I had to justify, why did I take time off? And I had to say, oh, I had 3 kids in 4 years. I have a 1.5-year-old, 3.5-year-old, and a 5.5-year-old. And then suddenly I spent my interviews talking about my children and whether or not I would be able to do these roles that I was overqualified for, or talking to like very junior recruiters and having them ask me these questions like, well, do you have any experience with customer electronics? I was like, yes, literally, like all of what I've designed, what I've just described to you is that. And it was a really awful experience. Very terrible. I hope that now it's better. I hope that now there's a lot more understanding and openness towards people taking a sabbatical, taking time off and coming back. But I think that I see pretty incredible people that I've worked with or that I know that have a really hard time transitioning back in, even though they are extremely talented. They have a lot of unique skill sets, and they're fantastic leaders. So I think there's like a weird stigma. When I was at Broadcom, I interviewed for a lot of jobs. I probably interviewed about at least once a year, and I was always offered the jobs because you're coming from a position of power. And I think that suddenly when you are not in a job, you're coming from what can be perceived as a position of weakness. And maybe you feel less confident, but also I kind of felt like taken advantage of by the recruiting process. Like it was not an enjoyable process by any means.
Would there have been any other way for you to position yourself that would have been better? Or is it just the situation? Like the situation just sucks and it's a system. And I just want to also contextualize the reason why I'm asking is I feel there's been a lot of rounds of layoffs recently. It could be a sabbatical for family reasons. It could be like a bunch of different reasons why people have had to take some time off. I think the advice would carry forward very, very prudently here.
Absolutely. I think that people who were impacted by all of these layoffs, which have been really, really challenging, and it's people that I've worked with who are extremely, extremely talented and really great at their jobs. I think that the thing I would try to do, and I had a friend say this to me, she said, you're coming into the interviews like this, like you're sad, you're down on yourself, like come like this. Like if you can take a moment to list some of the things that you did, like, okay, maybe you were impacted by layoffs, or maybe you chose to take time off, but you are good at your job. You have a lot of talents and a lot of skills and a lot of kind of like unique things that you do. And this company would be really, really lucky if they got to have you. And then maybe it's making a list of the things that you've done. Maybe it's thinking about like kind of that reframe, but coming in with that confidence, I think would be really, really helpful. And don't be hard on yourself. Like it's okay to take time. We don't all need to be working all the time continuously. Like it doesn't mean that you've lost these skills. It doesn't mean that you are no longer relevant. And that can be really, really challenging.
That's a great advice. I think sort of a similar advice that I received for non-technical roles was get 4 to 5 of your personal experiences you're really proud of and you did solid work. Know the inside and out of those stories and be able to apply it to any question that comes.
Yes, I mean, that's absolutely true because somebody may want to dig in. They may want to ask you another layer question and another layer question and another layer question. So it gives you some sense of control because you can drive the narrative towards the example that you want. And then you can be prepared to have that really deep conversation about it confidently.
Sort of going back to what you said about how you created the narratives and the reasons why leadership needs to be invested in innovation. It's similar in interviews. Like you need to sort of understand from the employer's perspective. I don't want to say game the system, but understand kind of what they're looking for and build the narrative around that.
I mean, ultimately, like they're trying to understand whether or not you would be a good fit and what you would bring to the role. And so the more that you can understand that and then demonstrate whatever examples you have that are relevant to it, you're just giving yourself the best chance. And if it's not a good fit, that's okay. I think like I had a friend who told me like interviews are fun. And she turned it into a game, to your point. She was like, this is fun. This is your opportunity to talk about yourself and get excited and don't take it personally. And I think like trying to kind of psych yourself up to this other version of it. This isn't like I'm not being tested. This isn't about my self-worth. This is an exciting place where I can talk about me and you can talk about you and I can see like, is this a good fit? It's kind of like dating. And turning it into less of that like zero-sum game and less of like you being on the spot. Obviously, you have bills to pay. You want a new job. This is all easier said than done. But I think trying that reframe was really helpful.
I love that. I love that. I also love the fact that this experience left a bit of a sour taste in your mouth, but you also made lemonade out of the situation. You pivoted into a very different type of role, both with the playing at learning and with Meta. How did you come about making that jump?
So I had this really phenomenal mentor. When I was at Broadcom, I helped start the Broadcom Women's Network, and we did this like speed mentoring event. And this person at Cisco was like, I don't know if he was a VP or very senior, but he was really amazing. And I talked to him, and I was talking about the parts of my job I liked. And at some point, he said, "Okay, wait. Give me a role description." And I said, "Well, this job is kind of out there." And he said, "No, pretend like there are no role descriptions out there. Just write a job. Like, don't try to fit into someone else's role description. Don't try to fit into an existing role. Write out the things that you would like most in a job and then keep adjusting it to your point about kind of what you were doing with your life goals." And I took, he said, like a back of the napkin, small list. And I made a list of the things that I loved the most. This was when I was at Broadcom. And where I am today and where I've gotten to fits every one of those. Like the parts that I love, the things that bring me energy. And I think the thing that I loved, in addition to him saying, don't feel tied to the existing roles, because I think as an engineer or any person in any role, there's a ladder and you feel like you have to follow that ladder. Or you feel like you have to have a very clear career projection and kind of narrative. And I think now I can tell a really cohesive narrative about where I got and why. But in those moments, I definitely couldn't. And so giving yourself that flexibility and that space and that ambiguity to say like, this is my kind of dream thing. And then you can slowly make your way towards it. And it may change along the way. The other thing he said, and he was this like very senior person who I really respected, is I know that I am really good at taking something new to about 80%. And I can do that really well. When it gets to like 90% baked, 95%, I really don't like that last 5%. Like there are people who love fixing the process, making it better, doing the things. And that's what kind of like brings them energy. And I hate that. And I think that permission to say like, these are the things I'm good at, but also these are the things I am not good at. And so like, there will always be some percentage of your role that are things that, you know, don't bring you joy, don't bring you energy, aren't your favorite. But at some point, like just accepting that and not fighting it and knowing like when he took on a new program, he would take it on and he would get it to 80% and he'd find someone else to pass it off to. Because he knew that that last 20% didn't align with his skill set. He would look for something new and exciting that had more ambiguity that he could build. So it's that like understanding yourself and not trying to fight it or feel like you have to be able to cover the entire spectrum in order to be good.
In the path, after playing at learning, you joined Meta. You mentioned two things that struck at me. One was it was a dream job, but it had the worst work-life balance. But it was also during COVID, which played out in I think exacerbated the work-life balance aspect. What was this space like? Do you remember it with fondness, or are you glad that it's over?
I miss it. I miss it to this day. I think part of the work-life balance was me. I think I came out feeling like I had so much to prove, like I had so much left to do. I think probably the triggers from the time between working at Broadcom and starting at Meta, where I was like, give me a chance, I will do amazing things. And I felt like I wasn't able to do that. I think I just came in like guns blazing. And there are so many opportunities. And I think part of the work-life balance was me like not understanding how to set boundaries. The incredible thing with Meta was like any idea that you have or that I had, I was able to get buy-in. People said, okay, all right, let's try it. And that was amazing. And I don't think I'd ever been in a situation like that. And I was able to do so much in a short period of time. And it was phenomenal and exciting and super impactful on me. I think that something I could have done is also thought about like, okay, you don't have to do everything now. You can think about like, great, some of these things are fantastic, but do we think about doing them later? Or how might we balance it? So I think that ultimately what I learned is for me how to set boundaries, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So I don't think it was a meta thing, it was a me thing. And I think part of it was that we were all working from home. I got to be a part of some really incredible things. I got to start the HACKS program, which was this internal incubation program for 0 to 1. It was amazing. It was incredible. That's how I met a lot of different folks at the company. But I think that as it became more successful, I just took on more and more. I just found workarounds. I found ways. I was like, okay, no problem. I can do that. These people can report to me. I can do this and I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. But like at some point it was a lot. And I think that I learned a lot, and it makes me so much better now because I understand how to say, okay, these are 4 things that I really want to do. I'm going to do 1 or 2 of them now, and I'm going to try this other thing later, or I'm going to try to get resources to do this thing. And those are just not ways that I thought about it. But I wouldn't change the opportunities I had, the people that I got to work with, the things that I was able to launch or influence or do. Like, I think it just, really career changing for me.
Do you think your criteria for satisfaction or boundary setting has changed since then?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I still catch myself like, I'm excited. I love what I do. So I want to do more. And I still catch myself saying, okay, I have these like 4 huge things happening in this very short period of time. Like, this is not sustainable. And I think that with other roles, there may be more clarity in terms of like other people are doing similar things to you. And so like, if you are a researcher, you're working on this many projects of this scale. If you're a PM, like same thing. And I think here, because it's kind of an uncharted path and you're often the only, and the role for both Meta and Okta did not exist before. And so you're doing it for the first time. You are setting that. And I think that I'm generally clearly not great with boundaries and work-life balance. So I think it is a thing that I'm trying to be really conscientious of and do a better job.
I can definitely empathize. I've mentioned in this podcast several times, I've gone through several bouts of burnout. And like the nature of the company is so that nobody stops you. We're all adults. You have to take accountability for yourself, but it's also hard to figure out what that balance is without feeling like you've gone too far in the extreme and you've become complacent. So yeah, if you ever find the secret key, please do share.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think that there are 2 things at play, though. I think one is like you feel like you're wasting the opportunity because nobody else is setting boundaries. Nobody's telling you no. And so if you step back or you do something less, and like also at Meta, like you're surrounded by the A+, by the top of the top of the top, everyone, right? And so you're looking around at people doing amazing things, and you're constantly like, am I doing enough? And are the things I'm doing amazing enough? You're going through the PSC system, and you have to like constantly like, am I having enough impact? Are the things I do they matter? Because it doesn't matter how much effort you put into it. It matters like, is it having an impact? And the priorities can change to that, like post about alien chess, right? The things around you are always changing. So you've got this ambiguity. There's so many unknowns. And then it can feel really bad when you're not constantly on or you're always thinking about it. But at the same time, like your life, your health, your family, your hobbies, your like all of those things are also really, 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 really important. And so yeah, right back at you. Like if you find the secret, you tell me. I think one sentence that I've tried to take with me is like, not everything that I could do, I should do. So not all like amazing ideas are worth doing. And so then it's like, how do I look at this like portfolio, this balance? In the same way that your point about ROI for innovation, how do I decide like which of the things am I going to invest in now and which ones am I just going to say a little bit later? That doesn't mean never. That doesn't mean they don't matter. It just means like prioritizing which is a huge concept at Meta, right? It's like, what am I prioritizing? What am I investing in? And what am I not? And for me, I think that has been helpful.
Would you have any advice for women in tech who are looking to get to that director level? Sometimes it feels like there is a cap, especially if you work in big tech. Like it's hard to break that ceiling. Any advice from your experience?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think you kind of see people like moving through the ranks rather quickly at the beginning, and then you really see this massive kind of barrier to entry at some point. And I think part of it is probably like good career conversations with your managers, with your team, but also if you're not happy with the progress or you don't feel like your work is being seen, I think at some point, and I'm not saying this was my experience because it absolutely was not, but I think at some point, sometimes you have to go somewhere different and kind of, I think that for me, I stayed at Broadcom for 11 years. And I think a lot of times the people who I saw progress really quickly maybe moved around, which sometimes is less feasible or more complicated depending on what's happening with your life on the side, right? And I think that also sometimes starting something new and proving yourself again can feel really overwhelming and scary, but I think it sometimes comes with a lot of opportunities. I think the last thing that's probably been said a lot is I think sometimes we look at a job description and we think we have to fit 100% of it or 95% of it. And I think that sometimes people go for it even if they only fit 50% and they kind of like show what they can do and come in with that growth mindset. So I know that for me, when I would look at a role, I would feel like I had to check every box. And if there were some of those boxes I didn't check, I sometimes didn't even apply. So I think it's maybe like always keep interviewing, always keep asking those questions, look at different roles. And then if there's a specific one, like what are the skill sets or the gaps or the experiences you need? And maybe somebody will give you the opportunity to do those things. So maybe your level doesn't change in that moment, but you're setting yourself up so that when you go for an interview or either internally or externally, you can say, oh, actually, I do have these experiences that align with this. I actually was doing this thing at this role. And if it's internal, it's like, well, what can I do in order to show or get to this next role? Like, let's have this conversation. I think for me, I didn't have that conversation. I just made assumptions similar to like engineering isn't for me, that like maybe this next level isn't for me. And I think that really kind of sells you short.
On that note of challenging yourself and prioritizing your life, this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Neta.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. I really enjoyed it.